boys stuck together and the two girls stuck together. That left me out there in the middle, see, when we were deciding who had done what, something. And they said I had to be by myself and talk my way out of it, and that's why I got to be such a talker. I said, it don't make any difference to me. How you figure it out, it's all right. I know what I'm supposed to do, and I'm going to do it.
When did you decide you were going to be a lawyer?
After I began teaching, because when I finished college and I started teaching, that was in 32, Western Reserve. And, but it had always bothered me. I've been very active in the civil rights movement, and it bothered me that being a school teacher, they didn't pay any attention to school teachers. And it was always what the law said. Well, the fact that you were a school teacher interpreting the law, that didn't help you any, because legal thinking was entirely different than everyday thinking, even school teacher thinking. So I got sick and tired of people telling me that, and I decided to go to law school. So I would have my own interpretation. You could have yours, always two sides to every question. So you could have your side, didn't make any difference to me. But I had to interpret it the way that I thought. So that was
And when you practiced, what was your area that you were?
civil rights. I never did any. I only got the assignments for criminal, so I could get money to pay for my law office expenses.
Uh-huh.
Because Negroes had all the problems, but they never had any money to pay.
Right.
And you had to be able to pay your girl telephone. I wasn't in any firm. I was sole practitioner by choice. I had a number of the young wannabe lawyers in my law office, just giving them a chance, because they, at the time when I came along, was just before the Depression, during the Depression, and after the Depression.
Wow.
And so it was really something.
I worked in a law firm just briefly where we have a big Hispanic community, and the lawyer was getting paid in tamales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Get what you can.
that's exactly right. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had any practice. So that was the reason I decided to run for council,
Okay.
because that was a part-time job.
Yeah,
And I was going to be able to have some income,
right.
so that I could do more things for the people, because as a lawyer, I did things for them and didn't charge them for it, because I had the income.
My dad's partner told my sister that he has to stay up late at night to undo all the good my dad does, or they'd never make any money.
Oh, I see.
Don't know how true
That
that
was-
was, but I
Yeah,
think
that was size of it.
he was such a good-hearted man.
Uh-huh, he really was. A fine man, fine name in the legal profession. That's why I recognized it so. Different from those other lawyers altogether. So that's why I picked up on his, when I recited it to him, he said, that was when I was running for preserve the best, improve the rest. You
Yes,
know.
yeah.
And he said, that was when I was running for council. I said, that's right. But that was what those times stood for at that time. And I repeated it, see, and he just smiled, you see. But there wasn't any date on the card, you see. But that was the time when I was coming through, because I practiced at the time that all those famous lawyers, Cleveland lawyers, were coming along. And Fred Ball was one of them.
Huh.
That's why I remembered the name. And Squire Saunders and Dempsey, all of them. They were fine men, because back there then, your word was your bond. And that made a big difference in the total community, when your word was your bond. And the men were really proud of that. And they would get in fights with reference to that if you cast aspersions upon their word. And that was a main thing. And if you can't interpret that word 3 or 4 times, well, you're a lost ball in the high weeds. But I stopped fighting the lawyers. Jack Day was a real good friend of mine, too. I knew who the main lawyers were, and who really stood for that principle as far as a man was concerned. His word was his bond. And when they would say it, I'd say, yeah, mine is too. Now let's get down and see what we can work out in this thing. So, and I never had any fusses with the judges, because I always, when I knew that the judge was prejudiced, either as far as woman was concerned or my skin, I just took the court reporter, and that's all.
Brought your own court reporter. I love
That's
that.
right. Never any argument or anything.
They were good then.
But they found out. When I had that court reporter that was saying, I am taking you to the Court of Appeals. Because when you may not have known it, but when you went to the Court of Appeals on them, why then you had the animosity of all the judges that they knew. But when you had a court reporter and your case was only on the basis of your interpretation of the law, I had the law on both sides. Selby Minor taught me that in
Excellent.
preparing a case. He was the first Negro that was an assistant prosecutor, but I knew him when he was a lawyer.
Uh-huh.
And when I got to be a lawyer, he asked me to come into his office. He had left the prosecutor's office and set up with Merle McCurdy. And it was Minor and McCurdy. And then he asked me to come into his office a year after I finished, passed the bar. And I did, because I had my own law office. And it was hard. Didn't get any cases or anything. And he didn't want to do civil practice. And of course, he knew that I didn't want to do any criminal practice. The only criminal practice that I had was when I had to meet my bills at the end of the month. And the people that I had served didn't have the money and hadn't paid me, but I still had to pay the bills. So, because I always usually settled the criminal cases that I was assigned to. And so he didn't want to practice any. He said, I don't know anything about the civil practice. I don't know how to draw up a petition. I've forgotten how to draw it up front. I was in law school, graduated from the University of Michigan Law School.
So you took that end. You took that end of the
That's
practice.
right, all of it. He and McCurdy did all the criminal practice. I said, well, I don't care anything about it. I didn't like that, having to change what the facts were as far as the criminal law was concerned. I didn't like that. I did a lot of juvenile court practice.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't take a case unless the parents agreed that they would accept whatever the recommendation from the judge was, because of course I knew the judge, and I knew we would be able to work it out, and so that it would be that I would be going along with what the judge was saying, because it was always, with a youngster, of course, boy, that ought to be going away, to be sent away, and they didn't want him sent away, and so if they didn't agree to it, why then I wouldn't take the case. I didn't want the boy growing up, becoming an adult, and then pointing me out, but she's a lawyer, she's a judge, and she told me to tell a story in order to handle my case. So I didn't want that. And
I used to have kids say on the street, there's my public defender.
oh, yeah,
And I go, shh, because it's supposed to be confidential.
that's right.
Tell anyone, but they kind of flaunt it,
Yes. Because that was supposed to be something great. You had to be, as far as among the children was concerned.
Right, if you were a bad boy.
Among the Negro boys, it was, you were something special in the court when the court let you have a public defender. Yeah, that's what they thought. And among their friends.
Right.
Among their friends.
Yeah, it hasn't changed. It was then, and it's still the same.
And that T.J. Lane getting out of jail, that's awful. That's terrible. They ought to be ashamed of themselves.
They can't
As
keep that
anybody
kid in
knows,
He
at
was
this
old.
late date, breaking out of jail,
He had
the kind of
3
record.
life sentences.
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
He was only there 18 months. smart.
You see how far it's
How
dropped down?
smart he was, but he didn't get very far. They caught him already.
Yes, yes. But for him to be able to escape, that was something. Way, way back in the beginning when they had jails. And at this late date for anybody, anyone knows that had to be in cahoots without, had to have a setup in order for that to happen. That's what I would tell the lawyers when they would come in, if I had the case.